welcome to another episode of the PRC Podcast. This is episode number 19, Las Vegas. Thank you all for listening. I'm your host, Jake. With me are my co-host and good friend Ryan of RJM Analytics, and also with us today is a special guest, Hayden, from our Discord community. We'll hear more from him in a bit and let him introduce himself, but for now I kind of want to just dive into things. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm a person that likes to get the bad stuff out of the way so that we can move on to the good, or so that I can move on to the good, or whatever. So I wanted to start by addressing the elephant in the room from yesterday, which was the whole Bubba Wallace, Kyle Larson blowout. I won't say all of my piece now as to not have too long an intro. I'll say part of it now and part after my colleague here speaks. But first, I'll just give the facts, since some of it can get fuzzy a lot of times with the way people go on about these things. Kyle Larson, he made an aggressive three-wide move on the bottom of the track. I think it was lap 95 in the second stage. And so he slid up the racetrack, and as a result, even though there wasn't contact between the two cars, Bubba's car made pretty significant contact with the outside wall. Now, this is not in any way a defense of Bubba's actions, which we'll have plenty to say about, but just being factual and to give the full context, Bubba did have a very fast car. He led for part of the first stage even, and he potentially had a chance to win the race if things played his way. And the wall hit did probably ruin his race. We've seen the toe links and steering systems in these cars are pretty fragile, and they don't hold up well to contact with the wall. And so his chance of winning the event probably ended right there. So some level of anger was understandable and justified, but not anything like, well, what we saw. Obviously, anything Bubba does gets a lot of attention, but yesterday was the biggest incident of his career so far, and there's obviously been a lot of reaction to it, and some of it which is going to unavoidably be toxic, but we aren't here to get into that, go into that part of it. We're here to give fair and constructive analysis and criticism of the situation. As for my opinion on it all, we'll get to that, but since I've spent enough time talking here already, I'll let Ryan have the floor for now.
Yeah, what a concept, constructive and, rational criticism on something that Bubba Wallace does. I think it's bad enough when Chase is involved in an incident and you get the whataboutisms of, what if Bubba did that? So here we are. Bubba did something like that, and all we get is, it's just like possible in the year 2022 to address something that somebody did head on and just say, okay, this was bad. And, I will admit here to being a little biased that I love Bubba. I think he's one of the best personalities in the sport. He's one of the most authentic people in the sport who, he's never going to give you any BS. Never just going to say things just for good PR. He really wears his emotions on his sleeves. But unfortunately, that can also be kind of his biggest undoing at times, and we saw that yesterday. And there's just no excuse for that crap in racing, no matter who it is. So, personally, I think that he should probably be suspended a week. He should sit out at Homestead, mainly just because I do think there's something to be said that, he's kind of got this mentality like, what's NASCAR going to do to me? I'm kind of their cash cow in a lot of ways. He is probably the most recognizable name in the sport. So it's like, kind of like when Jeff Gordon wrecked Boyer at Phoenix. Are they really going to suspend Jeff Gordon, of all people? And they didn't, and he won the race, which to me was disgusting. But I think it's kind of the same deal here. It's like daring NASCAR to really put their feet down and really send a message that kind of thing can't be tolerated. I guess what I will say here is I really don't want to get into the whataboutisms and all that. It's like when we've seen this going on all year between with Denny and Ross, and We saw it last year with Harvick and Chase, and it really does seem like a lot of the people kind of piling on Bubba for this are some people who thought that was okay or even cheered it. So, that can't obviously be denied. That being said, it's possible for multiple things to be bad. It's possible for multiple things to be good. And even regardless of how you feel about a driver, this just can't happen, and there should be some sort of reprimand for it. But you know what? On that note, let's just thank God that Bubba didn't wreck him under caution, right? Because that would have been so much more dangerous. Right?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
I guess that's all I really have to say on that. I can't really say anything else that hasn't been said on Twitter 500 million times today.
Yeah, or YouTube or whatever. But yeah. Yeah, there's not.
Actually, I will say just that. I still have a lot of respect for the guy as a person and a personality, and I think some people are kind of overblowing this into makes them lose respect for him or whatever. And I'm just like, I can speak to this as anybody can. We all screw up. We all make mistakes. And I think though, as long as he shows that he learns from this and that it's not something that's a pattern, it hasn't been. He did have the one incident with Kyle Busch at Watkins Glen a few years ago, but I don't think that was quite anywhere near this bad. So I still think he's one of the guys that I root for every week, and that's not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not really much new that we can add here because for once, a somewhat rare time, we're actually seem to mostly be in agreement with the mainstream on this issue. Most everybody, and I'm not talking about that crowd. I'm talking about just the people making fair criticisms or whatever on YouTube or whatnot that are saying that pretty much that he should be suspended, but they vary on maybe how long or how severe the punishment should be, but that should be the case. For my part, for full disclosure, I'm not a fan of Bubba Wallace, nor do I just really dislike him. I mean, I really don't have a strong opinion on him either way, and this doesn't really change that much. I'm not going to have lasting ill will against him for this, so long as it's just a one-time thing. That being said, I have to legitimately say that's the worst that I've seen a Cup driver behave in an event in quite a while. I mean, it was not just one thing, it was a combination of things. Hooking someone in the right rear on an intermediate at 160 miles an hour is bad enough. But then afterwards, he goes up and, tries to have a physical altercation with Kyle Larson. The NBC camera shot that they gave didn't really do it justice. There was a fan video that came out later from the stands that really showed it. I mean, he shoved Larson hard into the quarter panel of the car. Larson's not a big guy. That was forceful. I mean, that could have been something that hurt him, and then he continued to go after him afterwards, and Larson finally managed to kind of shoo him away, and Bubba had to go to the infield care center. And then, if that wasn't enough, he kind of compounded by giving what was, I'm just going to be frank, one of the most arrogant, pompous interviews I've ever heard. And not just 20 years of racing, but just sports watching in general. I mean, he took no responsibility whatsoever for the incident, blamed it all on Kyle Larson. He was clearly, trying to save himself from getting suspended, and, he got testy, which, Marty Snyder can be annoying, I'll grant you, but still, he was getting an unnecessary attitude with him over that. And look, I understand his frustration because he did have a good race car, and that did ruin his race. But at the same time, he could have backed out. It wouldn't have cost him that much ultimately in the grand scheme of things for him to have backed out and not let that happen. And Larson never did actually touch him. He just slid up the racetrack, and then by consequence of that, Bubba got in the wall, and then he just goes apeshit. And again, I'm not trying, to pile on him because again, I don't have a big thing against him, but it's just inexcusable on a lot of different levels. But I had a problem, obviously what he did with the race car was bad enough, but my biggest problem was actually what he did afterwards. That like he did that, he jumped both their cars, and then he wants to go afterwards and then try to attack them. I'll say on that note, he's very fortunate that Kyle Larson was the guy that he chose to go after, because if that had been just about anybody else, he would have been the one being attacked, not the other way around. Kyle Larson's, I think he's like 135 pounds soaking wet, and he doesn't pose any threat to him, and he's not a fighter anyways. And Kyle Larson's a pretty easygoing guy, and he's not gonna want to press things, and so that's another reason that I think he kind of, I think he thought that he could just get away with anything because Kyle Larson was willing to let it go. But it's just, the whole thing was ugly. As far as what I think should happen or will happen, personally, I think that what Ryan says is pretty much appropriate. I think he should be out for Homestead. Doesn't need to be any longer. Just one race to prove their point, and maybe a hefty, fine with some money going to charity. But as far as what I think will happen, I'm 50-50 on it. Tomorrow's Tuesday, which is when NASCAR always announces these things. I would say normally based on precedent that he's not going to be suspended because, as Ryan kind of alluded to, unless you do it under caution, like Kyle Busch did to Ron Hornaday all those years ago in the trucks, that, NASCAR doesn't penalize guys for doing this particular thing. But the one reason I think they might is because Bubba pretty much is just straight up daring them to do it. I mean, he was doing it in his interview. He's been saying it with his attitude and with his actions, not just now, but for a pretty good while now. He's pretty much forcing their hand and saying, if you don't do this, I've got free reign to do it again. I think, if they don't, he's going to be laughing at them. And so I think they kind of have to, and if they don't, it's going to lead to more down the road. And while I don't completely disagree with what you said earlier, I would say in one sense this is kind of a pattern because he has shown a kind of a tendency to be a bit unstable at times. He's had the feud, I think, with Alex Bowman. Like he punched, I think, a guy in the truck series over a practice incident one time, and he didn't instigate it, but there was also the little thing that he had with Denny, which is ironic considering that he's his driver now, which leads me to another point. Unfortunately, I think there's actually a bit of his car owner in him, like with that same kind of attitude of kind of thinking that he's the boss and that everyone should listen to him, and that nothing can be done to him, and that's the thing that's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way with him. It doesn't make me just totally dislike him, but he has always kind of had this attitude of, you can't really do anything to me. Like I said, just daring them to do something. And again, that's why I think there might be something forthcoming, but we'll just have to see. I'm really split on what I think is going to happen.
Well, NASCAR has been letting Denny get away with murder for 2 decades, or not murder, maybe just drugs. But I think there's a difference between just having a temper and outright just that. Thing. Other incidents Bubba's been involved in have just been small potatoes, especially compared to this. The Bowman thing, whatever. And whatever happened in trucks, I can't even remember that far back. I definitely do agree, though, that the extracurricular stuff was worse than what actually happened on the track. Because, you're going to wreck a guy, and they're the one who should be pissed off at you, not the other way around. And the fact that it was Kyle Larson also kind of does bring up another sort of elephant in the room here, which, Larson kind of, of all the people that he can fight with, Bubba's probably the last one. I don't think we even need to say why that is. But I definitely will say I gained some respect for Larson with how he handled that. I thought, and he had every right to just fly off the handle back at Bubba and really get after him. And instead, he even said he understood why he was mad. And I think that just kind of goes along with a lot of things that Larson has involved in, where he's just not mad at a guy when other guys would be, or when he screws up and someone's pissed off at him and he's like, yeah, I get that. This definitely could have been worse than it was.
Yeah.
Especially in terms of certain media people who could have gotten a hold of it and turned it into something that we really don't need. So
yeah, that was going to be one of the last couple of things I was going to say about it. Which the first thing I was going to say is if this was in the 2000s, Bubba would definitely be suspended for a minimum of 2 weeks, because that was back during NASCAR's micromanaging period, where they were penalizing guys points for saying the word shit on TV, and I think they even penalized Jeff Gordon points in 2006, I believe, just for shoving Matt Kenseth on pit road. But when Boys Have At It came about, which was 2010, that kind of all changed. We saw Carl Edwards, which and I like Carl Edwards, but there's no denying the things he did that season were terrible. He pretty much sent Keselowski into the catch fence once in Atlanta, and then sent him on an even harder crash at Gateway, and he got basically no consequences for that. And again, that's kind of set this precedent where NASCAR typically doesn't step in with stuff again unless it's under caution, as you said. And so, that's kind of a difference in the philosophy from the way it was with the NASCAR that when I was a kid and the way it is now. They're a lot more hands-off when it comes to that kind of stuff. But again, it just remains to be seen. And yes, I'll try not to go too, Larson fanboy here, because I already kind of did last week, when I said, but this is another example of what I mentioned last week of him being, the classiest loser in NASCAR, as I put it. I don't see how anyone in his position could have handled it any more understanding, because, he even said he hopes that Bubba's not penalized for it and that he understands why he was. Would you have gotten that response from anybody else in the field? Probably not. Maybe a couple of guys, but that's it. I just gain more and more admiration and respect for him. It takes a really big man to turn the other cheek in a situation like that. And, it's disappointing, the season that he's had, but I'm still proud of who he is and how he represents and presents himself. And that's really all I have to say about the situation in the end. I guess it's time for us finally now to introduce our guest. So, Hayden, just tell us a little bit about yourself and, how you got into this, and then your opinion on the whole Bubba Larson situation.
Okay, hi. My name is Hayden. I've been a NASCAR fan since I was 9 years old. I'm 21 now. I got into the PRC Discord server because it had been an offshoot of Racing Reference, a website which I've been using since I was 12, and I was interested in doing this podcast because I felt it would be a fun thing to do. Yeah, that's just a little bit, but I want to just move on. My thoughts on the Bubba Wallace situation are that his reaction is totally unwarranted. Totally unwarranted. It was way too harsh. It's way too harsh because Kyle Larson didn't even touch Bubba Wallace. He just kind of ran him up the racetrack a bit. Maybe that's why he hit the wall, but I think that it would have happened regardless because they hadn't touched, and Larson and Bubba Wallace wrecked him much harder than you'd expect from that. What makes it even worse, in my opinion, is that, of course, his teammate has pretty much announced his retirement, essentially, due to a concussion, and he feels that he could, by intentionally wrecking him, Kyle Larson, that gives the danger of doing the exact same thing. that's I mean, I know that that's always a threat, but like now coming like so soon, just literally the day after Kurt Busch's announcement, makes it even worse.
We totally didn't even mention that, but we'll talk about that later with Kurt and all that. But yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really disappointed in the whole situation because after all that he's been through, I was very happy to see Bubba Wallace finally starting to get good results, like his win at Kansas and some other good finishes, and now his reputation really takes a hit. I really hope that he can use this as a learning experience and can just reinvent himself. It wouldn't be the first time something like that has happened, but I really thought that he had really turned over a new leaf. Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, there's nobody better to learn from in that case than Kurt Busch. As mentioned, stepping away from full-time racing after this year, it's very unfortunate. He's really kind of hoping he would come back next year and have like a Dale Jr. type of retirement tour, just to say he could go out on his own terms. And I still do hope, and it sounds like he's open to running part-time as long as he's cleared, which I really hope he can do. I really hope that Bubba can take a thing or two away from him in terms of how to get better from this. I mean, I think he's infinitely less detestable than Kurt was at that stage of his career. Let's be real. He's not cursing out photographers and flipping off people on pit road and trying to ram into guys on pit road. Kurt was just totally unhinged back then. And I think Bubba as a personality is way more likable than Kurt was back then too. I mean, just Kurt wasn't this real cool uncle type of guy that he ended up becoming. And that's just, something that comes with age, I guess. But, Bubba is infinitely more likable, I think. And, you can really see the human being that he is in there. He's not perfect, but I think he really tries to be the best he can be. And, sometimes we just all make mistakes.
And that's what Kyle Larson even said that. So,
Yeah, I guess we should probably move on, though, now to...
Well, I do want to say one last thing about Kurt. First off, I want to plug your thing, RJM Analytics, on your blog that you wrote kind of a tribute to him on there. I highly recommend everybody read it. It's very heartfelt, quality stuff about Kurt and his incredible redemption arc in his career. And we already kind of gave him our kind of verbal, kind of the car wash treatment in our second episode after his Kansas win. So, I mean, if you want to hear more about that, you can go back and watch that. I would recommend that too. But I just, there's not really much more to say of that other than, I'm really going to miss him as a full-time competitor. I hope that he can run part-time. I hope they give him the number 97. And, I have a lot of admiration for the guy. And it's sad for this to happen, but, that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, really, there's very few people in sports who I think have more fascinating just character arcs than Kurt Busch has had. Just more fascinating to, really look at as kind of a case study of person that they are away from their job or whatever. So, yeah, as far as the race goes, though, it's an even-numbered year, which means Joey Logano will be in the Final Four. Can't exactly say I'm thrilled about that, but I will say he's had a better season this year than I think he's had probably since
2016.
I think maybe even better than that. I think he's been a top 3 driver this year, and I would not say he's been a top 3 driver since 2015, actually. Probably be the last year I would say that about. I was obviously very glad he didn't win the title that year. But, he earned it. He drove up there and passed Ross. And did it cleanly, which I was very surprised by. I thought when those two were up there at the end, it was going to be some sort of shit show. Either Ross would back both of them throwing a dumb block, or Logano would punt him like he did to Kenseth, and like he did to Byron.
I was nervous we would get a repeat of like Fontana 2013 or something, but then with Chastain wrecking Logano, but this time Chastain wrecking Logano or something, or they both wreck and Kyle Busch would have won again. I'm glad that didn't happen. Well, Kyle Busch was ahead.
He
finished third. I'm really glad it ended cleanly and that didn't happen.
Yeah, we all kind of give Hayden some friendly trash talk sometimes about him kind of not wanting guys like Chase Briscoe, who's not had obviously a top 8 season, to advance in the playoffs, which, I hope he doesn't make it there either. He would be the most undeserving champion probably of all time. Yeah, we dodged that bullet. And, Logano obviously has been one of the top 4 drivers this year, so I guess I just hope he doesn't win at Phoenix, especially when my horse is still in the race.
Yeah, I don't want him to win the title either, but at the very least, it would be a better championship than his 2018 title.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Mainly because we have not had, I've mentioned this before, but, we have not had any absolutely dominant drivers this year. Even Chase has had bad races like yesterday, which I don't know what the hell was going on there, but he ran 20th all day on merit. And 2018 was just Logano, factoring in equipment, was probably the 6th or 7th best driver of the season, and 3 guys he beat in the championship round were just dominant, and that was, in my opinion, the worst championship of the playoff era, so this would be much better than that, at least. Yeah. I guess as far as the actual racing product, biggest thing there is, after all the talk the last month or so of, it's all of a sudden retcon the Gen 7 as putting on a terrible racing product, and everything about it is suddenly bad. Really pouring one out for those folks after yesterday, because I'm not really sure how you can put any sort of negative spin on that unless you have a predetermined opinion that it was bad, which a lot of those people do.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just, we can't say it enough how great the intermediate racing has been this year. Really, the only issue I've had with it is that it seems almost kind of too competitive in a sort of a way. Like, you see guys just go from 15th to 5th on a restart without ever really, just because they get in the right lane or whatever, or even through pit stops. I think pit stops have had more variance this year than before, and that's kind of causing a lot of that. Like, guys like Eric Almirola just magically appearing in the top 5 without ever really driving up there. I also think a lot of that, though, is just because of how many restarts there have been this year, which create all these opportunities for field to kind of get really jumbled up that we wouldn't be having otherwise. But, that's a very, very minor complaint in what's otherwise been a fantastic season of racing on the intermediates.
Yeah, I was very, I was concerned. Yeah, I was concerned that after what happened at Texas, that the tires would keep blowing out again, but that didn't happen. I don't think. In fact, were there any flat tires? I mean, I know Cindric did, but he had already gotten the wall. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think he blew a tire.
It was just the crap boxes, really.
Yeah. So there were really no tire issues, and there weren't any mechanical issues other than Landon Castle either. So,
yeah. Yeah. So after the last 2 races, I was very, very satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think I'm really excited for next week at Homestead, because last year it was one of the best races. I think it was one of my favorite races of last year. And I also remember it being very good in 2020, so I'm optimistic it'll put on a great show.
I can't remember the last time Homestead had a bad race, honestly. It's maybe one of those title races in like 18 or 19, I don't know. I think the title just kind of overshadowed the actual racing. It was kind of harder to really notice just how good the racing was. And now that we have Homestead as just kind of being a regular race, even though it's still in the playoffs, it's allowed us to appreciate it more. And I think it's going to be one of the best races of the year.
Yeah, for me, the race that we had yesterday, it's a shame that the incident we spoke of earlier happened, because it overshadowed what was a really quality race. That was a really good event. Even though technically Talladega was a better race, I actually enjoyed Vegas the most of any race in quite a while. It was the most truly eventful race of the chase that we've had so far, which outside of all the mechanical failures and and tire failures and whatnot, has actually been pretty ho-hum so far. I mean, but we had some incidents yesterday, not too many. Like, it was just, I guess, about the quote-unquote right amount. Like, not so much that it ruined the race, but enough to keep it, interesting with the restarts after what was a pretty clean first half of the race. And, there was not too much action, but not too little action. It was still kind of hard to make up ground in the first 10 laps after a restart, but then once the tires wore out, you could sort of make up some ground. You kind of saw some mini comers and goers, and that was enjoyable. And you could pass, you could make some passes for the lead, and so to me that pretty much marks a quality intermediate race. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago or told me 10 years ago that Las Vegas was going to be one of the best intermediate tracks on the schedule, or maybe even best tracks, period, I'd have asked you what you were on and if I could have some of it. But that's where we're at now. It was a really good track with the 550 package, and it's proved to be a good one with this car too. And as far as the result and Logano, I mean, I'm no Logano fan, obviously. He's not one of my very least favorites now, but so long as he's not doing some bull crap, like at Darlington or whatever, I don't really have a big problem with it. It slightly annoys me that he's in Championship 4, but that was pretty much inevitable anyways, and don't want him to win the title, but if he does, I mean, he already got his Mickey Mouse title in 2018, as we mentioned, and, another one won't kill me, I guess. This is the best season that he's had since 2016, for certain. He's definitely cemented himself as a top 5 driver, at least for the year. And, I don't like to admit it, but, you can't really deny that he's been really good at taking advantage of his opportunities. He was fortunate yesterday in the sense that he was the first of that group, I think with about 25 laps to go or so whatnot, that went down pit road and got 4 fresh tires, and then he kept getting cautions afterwards that moved him up the order, and at the end, he had an advantage over everybody else, but still, he took advantage of it. Now, I'll show a little bit of mild salt here and say that I definitely don't think that he would have beaten Ross Chastain, one of my favorites, if they'd been on even terms. Ross did a really good job to even keep him back as long as he did, but that's the way it is sometimes. They weren't on even terms, and it was not a given that Logano was going to get past him, Ross, even with that being said, because Ross is a very good, difficult guy to get around. But he did. He pulled it off clean. He earned it. He was number 1, actually. He got the ETDR win in Ryan's metrics yesterday, so he deserves the win. He was legitimately a top 5 car all day, and you have to give him credit for that, for taking advantage of his opportunity. Glad that Ross had another good run yesterday. I think that stretch, I might have said it before, that he had in August where he just kept self-inflicting, bad results on himself, where he just kept getting in incidents every week. I think it helped him, actually, because it kind of showed him that, he can't just keep driving with no abandon at all. And and be successful. And so far this chase, he's kept his nose clean. I don't expect that necessarily to last through the remaining 3 races, but he's kept his head down and done what he had to do. Apparently Phil Surgeon and the crew kind of had a talk with him, and like before the Roval, to not be too aggressive. And well, he didn't pass anybody under green all day at the Roval, so he did what he needed to there, and he did a good job. He took his opportunities when he needed to.
Well,
made some
very
3
few
wide
people passed anybody under green at the Roval.
Yeah, well, that's true. But he took his opportunities when he needed to, like on the restarts yesterday. But otherwise, he did a good job of doing it the way you're supposed to. And so I was glad to see him have a good run. Trackhouse said that was the first race that they've really been aggressive with their setups in quite a while, which showed. Both he and Suarez were very fast yesterday, fastest they've been in a while, so makes sense. And, only other guy I'll say, you have to give Briscoe credit. He did very well yesterday. That was a nice recovery. The guy was 28th, 1 lap down, a fair amount into the race. And he came back and took advantage of his opportunities on restarts, and he worked his way up, and it would have been a legitimate win if he'd made the final passes at the end, but it was still a good effort from him. But no, he has no business being in the Final 4, and I hope he doesn't make it. But like I also said yesterday, I'm kind of over the outrage of it, in that we all know the system is a joke. We've been over it several times already, even on this show. It's for entertainment. It's a gimmick. It's not meant to determine who the best driver or team actually is over the course of a season. It's not there for that. And we all know here who the best drivers have been. We have enough sense to make it out. It's not really going to change our view of, what transpires, whoever it is that holds up the trophy at the end. It's just what it is, and that's all we can really say.
In regards to Logano, I'm perfectly fine with him winning. I would have, because he was one of the fastest all day, and he earned it. It was much more, much better than Chris. It was nice to get a deserving winner after Christopher Bell's win last week, which I felt was really one of the weakest wins of the season, because pretty much everything had to because pretty much everybody, all of the fastest drivers had problems. That didn't happen this time.
Yeah, and that's the last thing I wanted to say. We're not going to go back to the whole Bubba thing, but that's one part I did forget. That wreck that happened with him and Larson, it did also take Bell out and kind of ruin his Final 4 chances, which on one hand, I do feel sorry for him, because that was not his fault, and he got caught up in something he was completely innocent in, and that was another bad part of Bubba's interview, where he kind of just absconded responsibility for that, and just said pretty much, no, that's sports, that's the way it goes, and all that. But at the same time, I also don't feel sorry for him, because he also has no real business being in the Final 4, and he's quite frankly been annoying all of us, and he didn't deserve that win last week, and I guess you could say it sort of evens out his luck, but, that's just, again, whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely been nice outside of the Roval to have his luck kind of crash back down to earth the last couple of weeks, with Texas as well. Run well at Talladega. Was he involved in the wreck there? I forgot.
I think he. I don't think so, but I think he had some other issues.
Had TDR scores under 103 the last 4 races. On that note, Briscoe is 89 ETDR yesterday. That would have been, if he'd won, it would have been a little bit better probably, but would have definitely been one of the weakest wins of the season, although he did drive his way up there for the most part, so can't rag on him too much there. And I don't think we need to really go on any further about how weak of a season, if he makes the Final 4, it would be.
And that leads me to another thing. You guys are both pretty big in analytics, and so if you want to go on more about ETDR or whatever other measure, you can go ahead.
Well, as I mentioned last week, ETDR is just going to become TDR next year, so I'm really only just still using this system for consistency purposes. And the regular. Actually, in the very beginning when I started this, it was TDR, so it's kind of back to that in a way, but it's going to be a combination of ETDR and ATDR, and it will much more heavily weigh equipment, but also not as I've been doing with ATDR. The equipment is a multiplier, not just a one, however much percent of the formula. So, which I think will do a much better job of properly weighing all this stuff, so that the most dominant guys are still on top. But being in a bad car doesn't automatically make you 30th or whatever. Just gets back to looking ahead in the playoffs. People yesterday, it seemed like were really kind of sky is falling over Chase Elliott because he had a bad race. But, let's also remember the same shit happened to him at Darlington in the first round and then at Texas when he crashed, and it was like he's suddenly only a couple points above the cut line. He's going to be perfectly fine, I think, especially with Martinsville later in this round, where I would say he's probably the favorite to win there.
Yeah, I think that Homestead will really be a key rate, because if he's this off next week as well, then that puts him in a must-win situation for Martinsville. Well, he can certainly do that because that might be his best track. Well, that is his best track. It's not a guarantee. So yeah, you really can't miss.
I would not say he would be in a must-win, though. He's still, 15 points above the cut line right now?
17.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I think if he has...
For some reason,
if he has a bad race... Even if he has a bad race next week, he can easily still, I think, point his way in. So.
Yeah. After Harvick in 2020, I'm not going to say that there's any guarantees, but, he's in pretty good shape. As long as I think he gets stage points at Homestead, he's going to be pretty much a lock. And plus, he even has more carryover points than Harvick did in 2020. Even Harvick didn't have the advantage that Chase has this year in that respect. So, I mean, he could DNF twice, but other than that, I think he's going to be fine. And that's, again, just the usual kind of alarmist stuff.
The guy who I think is really in danger right now is Ryan Blaney because of finish he ended up having yesterday. Which that was really unfortunate for me. Like I said last week, I've been kind of low key, sort of hoping Blaney at least makes it to Phoenix without a win. Though he'd won yesterday, no complaints with that. He had probably best car along with his teammate. But yeah, you really can't be making self-inflicted errors like that. And that seemed like what it was, and to me, that's kind of what has, but in my opinion, Logano's season really over his, in terms of just capitalizing on good situations and not being your own worst enemy, which I think Blaney, if there's one criticism of him as a driver, it's that he is kind of his own worst enemy. He doesn't handle adversity very well. And he just makes these sort of self-inflicted errors that, when he has the best car, it's like, come on, man, you got to be better than this if you're going to be legitimate title contender. So hopefully he can still make it. He's also really good at Martinsville, and Penske was fast there in the spring, so definitely still obviously very probable that I would say probably greater than a 50% chance he still gets in, but
yeah. I think he'll make it, but it's going to be close.
I think that it's given that seemed that Penske has really figured out the intermediates, at least based on yesterday. If they have the same speed at Homestead, Miami, I think he'll probably be pretty okay, especially since he's very fast at Martinsville.
I'm interested mainly for Homestead is to see how good Tyler Reddick is going to be there, because yesterday it was weird. It was like he had by far the best car on short runs, I think, but then it would be like his car just hit sort of a wall where it just fell way off later in runs.
Yeah,
like,
he had no long run speed.
It seemed like though later in the race that was kind of fixing itself out, and he was really flying on that one run late in the race where I think it restarted at the back, and he was at like a lap or two fresher fuel than everybody else did. Of course, that could have been everybody else was saving, and he really wasn't. But
They didn't get it full the first time. That's what they didn't get the car full the first time, and they had to bring him back down. Is what it was.
I thought though, if that had gone green from there, he quite possibly could have won, especially if guys had run out of fuel. But I was kind of hoping for a few mileage finish, honestly. We just haven't had one since Pocono last year.
Yeah, I think that was the last one. Yeah. There was. I'm thinking there was another, but no, that was. I think I was thinking of one which was going to be, but a caution came out with like a short amount of laps left. Yeah, Reddick. I think he's gonna win. I think he's gonna win next week. I mean, he was really great there in his rookie year. He ran like top 5 all day. Then last year he charged all the way up to second. Of course, this is a new car, and this isn't the Gen 7. That was in the Gen 6. But Reddick has been excellent on the intermediates all year. So I don't think it's going to be any exception.
Yeah, might as well just get into that then with our picks for next week. Hayden already gave his there. I'm going to say Reddick will have the best car next week. Will quite possibly probably lead the most laps, but since it's 2022 and every intermediate this year has seemed like it's been chaos, not necessarily a bad thing, I'm going to just hopefully jinx him and say Denny Hamlin is my pick to win because reasons, I guess. I don't know. Kyle Larson will also be a guy to watch, obviously, with how good he is there.
Because I would kind of Larson is a driver. Even though I pick Red to win, Larson's one to be kind of rooting for because it would really cross off a big. How hasn't he won their track? Like his other example being Darlington because he's been great there so long, but no wins. So. He already filled the Bristol gap last year.
Yeah. I think like his first 3 career races in Cup that he had at Homestead, he was about to win and then something happened. Something like that. I think, that's what
he didn't really push the issue in 2017 because he wasn't part of the title race, but probably 2016 too. I think he dominated that, and then Johnson got by him on the last restart. I think that was just him kind of being like, all right, you're racing for a championship. I'm not. So, I guess my Hamlin pick is pretty much just he's really good there, so Jinx, do your work. I think Reddick and Larson are probably going to be 2 of the best cars, and definitely, like I said,
the one doubt I have about Larson is that that Hendrick seems to be lacking intermediate speed compared to, actually maybe not. I mean, Alex Bowman, for instance, did dominate Kansas, and Chase Elliott was doing great at Texas before he crashed. Maybe it's more that their speed can be inconsistent on a car-to-car basis.
I think that's exactly what it is, and just with this season being so weird with those setups from week to week, it seems like there's not really any sort of consistent speed that anybody has really anywhere. The last guy I was going to bring up for next week would be William Byron, who obviously dominated there last year. It is a different type of car, but still could be a great chance for him to lock himself into Homestead, which I would be perfectly okay with.
Yeah, I don't really put much stock into team performance.
But I meant Phoenix, obviously.
Yeah, I don't really put a lot of stock in the intermediate performance so far, just because Homestead is it's an intermediate, but it's a pretty unique racetrack. There isn't really another one like it. With the worn surface, the tire wear they have, the variable banking, which is actually listed as that. and the oval characteristic of it, it's just unique. It's not really like any other racetrack, and so I kind of consider it its own entity. But certainly, there's not really anything different or new I can add. This is a fantastic track for Tyler Reddick. I absolutely expect him to be very fast, probably a lot of laps. Whether he'll actually win really just comes down to whether he has good fortune or not. But I also expect Chase to be strong. I expect Larson to be maybe a top 5 car. But unfortunately, I have to kind of concur with Ryan, but in a more genuine way, that Denny Hamlin's going to be strong, and I'm going to tentatively pick him to win the race and be a total arrogant jerk in his interview afterwards, and basically just kind of like, send an ode to the haters or whatever it is that he wants to do after the Bubba thing or whatever. But I don't know. Hope I'm wrong, but he's a contender, but really there's no solid pick for it. Could be him, could be Reddick, could be Chase, could be Byron, could be any of them, but I'm just going to say Denny.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the whole angle of he might be, a bit extra pumped up with the Bubba stuff, especially if he gets suspended. So for that petty reason alone, I am now hoping Bubba doesn't get suspended. I guess we can briefly touch on Xfinity.
Yeah, sure.
With Josh Berry winning and locking himself into the championship round, which means at least one of the 4 main guys who've been dominant all season will not be there, and I think AJ Allmendinger probably is the most likely for that with the issue he had late in that race. I think it would be personally hilarious if Noah Gragson were the one who would somehow fall out of it. Yeah, it's just obviously another product of this system. Berry has not been really a top 4 guy this year, but I don't really think he's be a huge factor at Phoenix anyway. That track is more kind of in Justin Allgaier or Gragson's sort of wheelhouse. Still, though, I think he's, for a guy a lot of people were kind of be expecting more from this year, and at least over the summer when he kind of wasn't really that lights out compared to his teammates. It's nice to see him have another win, and interested to see how things end up shaking out over there.
Yeah, go ahead, Hayden.
Well, I didn't have anything to say for that because I don't really follow the Xfinity.
Oh, yeah, right, I forgot. Yeah, there's a couple of guys. I know Adam doesn't, and yeah, it just hit me that you don't do it that much either. So, yeah, don't have a whole lot to say because I didn't see all the race. I missed part of it out. Seemed like a solid race. Nothing, really too much to say, like bad or good. I like Barry, fairly well. Seems like a nice guy. Can be kind of reckless on the racetrack, do some stupid things sometimes. But I admire him, just the fact that he's kind of an everyman that's made his way in the Xfinity Series and made a name for himself. The way he met Junior.
Yeah, really kind of, in a lot of ways, are really sort of a poor man's Ross Chastain.
Yeah, exactly. And the way he kind of, like, he met Junior through iRacing, and he's kind of here as this kind of more middle-aged project that's going in. And so I admire that part of him. As like I said before about the whole chase system and whatnot. I'm not going to get, huff about it because, again, it is what it is. It's not there to determine who the best is. And, like one guy that deserves to be in probably isn't, but, whatever. I hope AJ makes it, even though I don't think he's really much of a threat to actually win at Phoenix. But if he doesn't, I'll live. I'd say Allgaier is probably the one most in danger of missing it. But, who knows? Just like, in Cup, I would say that there's really 5 guys that are real contenders out of the 8. And then, like Briscoe and Bell pretty much just have to have lightning strike twice to be in Phoenix. And then the other guys are real contenders. But, yeah, that's pretty much my take on it.
Yeah, think that's pretty much all the bases we needed to cover for this week. Hayden, you have anything else you want to add, or?
Well, one thing is that I was trying to think. There's one other. Oh yeah, I want to talk about the Kyle Busch's comeback in yesterday's Cup race. I thought very, very impressive.
That was wild.
He was able to finish third despite spinning out and then later on having the loose wheel. Well, the wheel coming off, which leads to the suspension.
Which was like, with 40 laps to go or something? It was late in the race.
Yeah. Last pit stop he made.
With like 40 to go. It was nice to see Busch finally get a good finish after he also got on a Charles Roval. It's nice to get him finally getting top 5 finishes after months and months of misfortune, mistakes, stuff like that.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, it's almost sort of too easy to make up ground right now on the intermediates. Because, when I saw him, climbing into the top 5 in those closing laps, and I'm like, wait a minute, wasn't he, just 25 laps ago, up there with the tire coming off? Did he even stay on the lead lap through that? I don't remember, but, yeah.
I think he had stayed. He lost the lap during the spin and got it back.
Yeah, I remember that.
Stayed on the lead lap in the loose wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, still obviously very impressive comeback, and it's funny that he's kind of had these back-to-back top 5s now in races where he didn't really run in the top 5 all race after months of running really well and not getting the finishes, which just one more point for the finish doesn't tell the whole story. And
I think this race he seemed to be pretty fast before he spun.
He was fast. He just didn't have the track position. Yeah.
It wasn't like he was he fluked into it.
I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that a finishing position. I mean, we all know this. It's just can't take it as everything.
Yeah, I thought it was a very impressive comeback from him too. I barely even noticed that he'd even snuck up there, and he had that tire thing, and then suddenly out of nowhere, 5 laps to go, when I was watching the battle for the lead, he was there half a second behind them in 4th, just out of nowhere. It's crazy to think he's still actually 3rd in laps led this year with 671, and and it was classic Kyle Busch even afterwards in the interview, he was still, they asked him about it, and he said, well, it's not a win, it's still an L, whatever. That's, it's kind of classic Kyle Busch, but, it's just amusing. But I do kind of hope that he wins one of the remaining 3 races that he has for Gibbs before he kind of goes into career purgatory for Childress. We'll just have to see on that. But, I hope it goes well for him, and that he has a proper kind of send-off for this part of his career we never thought would end, but it is coming to an end. And, so anything else you guys wanted to say?
I think that's about it.
I think I covered everything I needed to.
Okay, that does it then. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for Hayden, or to you, Hayden, for coming on and being a guest with us. Adam couldn't be on here tonight, so you filled his shoes nicely and were able to step in for us. Thank you. We appreciate your contribution and all you do.
I think Adam is just torturing himself watching his Broncos instead of this. So.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
Next week.
Yeah, that sucks for him. I hate it, but thank you, Hayden, for your contributions and for what you do in our community, the info you provide, and for coming on here today to help us. The TRC podcast is me, Jake, the co-host, and emotional analyst and whatnot. Ryan, co-host and head analyst and statistician, and again our guest today, Hayden. We'll see if Adam's able to come on next week. We'll just have to wait on that. But if he's not, we'll find someone else to fit the bill. And yeah, that was episode number 19 of the TRC podcast, Las Vegas. Thanks to all of you for all of your support. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Follow Ryan with his information at RJM Analytics on Twitter. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.